Any changes to America's missile defense posture has traditionally been a source of concern for the other nuclear military powers. Golden Dome has proven no different. At the outset, Russia and China even gave a joint statement condemning the plan. So what comes next with integrated missile defense, both for America's allies and for its competitors? To start this section of the roundtable, I talked with CSIS's Tom Karako and asked him, how does he expect China to respond? He didn't mince words.
Well, if China and Russia are not a little bit irritated by what we're doing on Golden Dome, I'm going to be very disappointed, because that means that we're not doing enough of the right things to counter the actual threats and to impose costs. And so we should expect the typical press releases from Moscow and Beijing, the typical kind of rhetoric, oh, this is provocative and destabilizing. It wasn't that many years ago when Russia was saying that a single Patriot launcher in Poland with no missiles on it was provocative and destabilizing. So expect that. Look, this is about creating a limited and measure of protection for a limited number of places in the United States territory that raises the threshold for attack. They would rather there not be any speed bumps in the air for their ability to hold things at risk. And this is about creating those speed bumps in the air, as it were.
So I guess I'll say, as someone who tried to work on missile defense cooperation with Russia in the Obama administration, the way Russia will certainly react is with alarm. And I think China as well, especially if a successful demonstration is shown, right? Anything that would upset in the strategic planning minds in the Russians or the Chinese, their ability to inflict really untold damage on the United States in order to deter nuclear use in either direction, will not only be met with alarm, it will be met with systems that can get around whatever defenses we devise, and some of those systems might not even be nuclear. So, right, anything that gets us outside of mutually assured destruction is frankly problematic and will only be temporary. The one thing I will say, though, is, so Tom just said limited. I have not seen limited anywhere. That would be more in keeping with congressional direction and policy over time. But I haven't seen that, and of course there's always a difference between how things are being talked about and what's actually doable at scale. I think my general experience with at least the Russian mind is once you can do one thing, they assume the scale. And so that will also be problematic. The flip side on all this is, if you take away the homeland piece, right? Say I'm gonna augment homeland defense by another 40 NGIs, okay, that's limited in my mind. Talking about protecting maneuver forces, naval forces, marine forces in the Pacific for an Indo-Pacific fight, I think we're clearly deficient there, and I think that this can also add to that defense. That will be a deterrent that is really well needed and perhaps overdue.
The defense of Israel, the 12-day war with the expenditure of many THAAD interceptor rounds by the United States, it's a scary number. And we're going to have to be replenishing that very quickly. The Pentagon is, I think, appropriately mashing the panic button for the regional kind of force protection thing.
Which all gets back to this issue of being able to produce these munitions at scale and at a reasonable cost instead of $1 billion every time you shoot a couple off. Yeah.
All true. I do want to come back to the limited thing, which is that I don't think this is going to get us out of the, let's just say, mutual vulnerability situation.
That's a better word. That's a better word, but fair enough.
We're not going to be able to stop 1,000 ICBMs, and frankly, that's not the point. It's about raising the threshold, contributing to deterrence by removing the onesies and twosies or the fait accomplis and that sort of thing, as I see it. Same with the defense of Guam. You're not going to be able to defend Guam forever. It's about defending it long enough to.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's a fair point, and I'm in agreement. Yeah.
The U.S., of course, isn't the only country interested in this kind of integrated defense network. We've seen other countries. Turkey has its Steel Dome. India recently announced something. But the NATO nations are, in some ways, maybe even ahead of where the U.S. is right now. Tom, how do you assess those efforts? Yeah,
look, it's not an American idiosyncrasy, the need to contend with various air and missile threats. It's a weekly problem when garden variety cruise missiles are coming into Ukraine with enormous frequency. And of course, we saw the Israel thing as well. But in Europe, the NATO Secretary General says we need to increase their air and missile defense expenditures 5-fold. You see Germany entering into a multi-billion euro deal to produce PAC-2s and some other things like that. And I think it's because that's where the threat is. And that's what has to be met. Japan and Australia both have both long-range fires and missile defense in their top 2 modernization priorities. So it's definitely beyond the United States. It's not an American idiosyncrasy. And you know what? That's just, again, a reflection of the threat, but it's also a little bit of a harkening back to the SDI effort, which was, it also had very much of an international component and working with different allies and partners, admittedly on science and technology stuff then, as opposed to production and procurement today.
I'd probably argue it's also, I mean, almost mainly a function of geography, right? So the United States fundamentally has 2 oceans protecting it from short-range threats. In Europe, the long-range Shahed drones that Russia is launching by the hundreds and even the thousands can easily range all sorts of parts of Europe. And so the need for air defense at scale against munitions at scale for these shorter ranges is a threat we simply don't face, and yet our allies do. And I think that is probably, you watch Ukraine and you watch just the sheer number of drones delivering munitions in each direction every day. It's a huge wake-up call, and I think 5 times is maybe a low number, frankly, for what is needed.
Yeah. How concerned should we be about then let's call it a race for munitions, right? If everyone's trying to get the same defensive weapons, that means the same supply chain in a lot of cases, even down to energetic materials. Is there a way forward to make sure that this doesn't become everyone's kind of scrambling for their own stuff? I mean, does there need to be more integration across the allies and partners on this?
You know, a piece of the executive order that everybody seems to have forgotten about was the requirement for an Allied and theater missile defense review. I think it was due in May. Hopefully it'll be forthcoming in the coming months here. And I think that's going to be huge. Look, the number of PAC-3 production is going to grow, but the number of Patriot operators is 18 worldwide, and there is going to be limitations on that. I think that's why you see Japan trying to produce more and facilitize more for them, although they're still reliant upon the U.S. for the secret. It's why you see Germany getting into this game. I mean, if you looked at the stock price of Rheinmetall over the past 6 months, for instance, on this front. So there's a lot of effort. Having said that, there are some things that the United States of America is really the best at, and that's probably not going to change. And that's going to also be a limitation on how many countries can really field the highest end. Although we see South Korea, we see Israel doing a lot more. There's still, I would say, an advantage at the very high end.